There are moments in your life that arrive disguised as something ordinary, moments that hinge on a single, whispered question. They are the doors you never knew were there, standing slightly ajar in the long, familiar hallway of your existence. For years, you walk past them, sensing a different quality to the air that slips through the crack, a different temperature, a different scent, but you tell yourself it's just a draft. You tell yourself it's nothing. You learn the shape of the hallway, the feel of the floorboards beneath your feet, the exact pattern of light and shadow, and you call it home. You call it safe. And then one night, someone you have loved in silence for what feels like a lifetime stops in front of one of those doors, turns the handle, and asks if it would be okay to step inside. In that moment, the entire architecture of your life shivers, and you know, with a terrifying and exhilarating certainty, that nothing will ever be ordinary again. For me, that moment smelled like old books and the black tea I'd let go cold on my nightstand. It sounded like the hum of the city 3 floors below, a distant, mechanical lullaby. It felt like the weight of Julian's gaze in the near darkness of my bedroom, a physical pressure against my skin. He was lying on his side, a guest in my bed as he had been so many nights before, a fixture of circumstance and plausible deniability. But tonight was different. The silence between us wasn't the comfortable, sleepy void it usually was. It was a tightly wound spring, a held breath. Every casual intimacy we had built over the past few months, the shared blankets, the accidental brushing of hands, the simple, profound fact of his presence, had led us here, to this precipice. He had been watching me. I could feel it long before I turned my head to meet his eyes. The sliver of moonlight filtering through the gap in the curtains was just enough to illuminate the conflict on his face, the vulnerability that stripped away all his usual easy confidence. He looked like a man standing at a crossroads he never intended to find. He whispered my name. Leo. It was barely a sound, more a puff of air given shape, but it landed in the quiet room with the force of a tectonic shift. It was the first time he had ever said my name in this space, in this proximity. It was an acknowledgement, a confession. I didn't answer, I couldn't. My entire being was focused on the space between us, a gulf of a few inches that felt as vast and as charged as a stormy sea. Then he asked the question. Would it be okay, he started, his voice a low, rough thing, frayed at the edges with something I couldn't name. He swallowed, the sound loud in the stillness. Would it be okay if I kissed you? And the hallway of my life trembled. The door swung open, and the world outside it was blinding. To understand the weight of that question, you would have to understand the foundation upon which our friendship was built, a bedrock of careful boundaries and unspoken truths I had meticulously laid myself. You would have to go back 3 years, to a cracked and oil-stained patch of asphalt in a hospital parking garage, Level C, Section 4. That was where Julian found me. Or rather, that was where he stumbled upon the wreckage of me. I was sitting on the cold concrete with my back against the tire of my beat-up sedan, my knees drawn up to my chest, trying to make myself as small as possible, as if I could physically compress my grief into a manageable size. The fluorescent lights above hummed a flat, indifferent note, casting everything in a sickly yellow-green glow. I was crying, but not in a cinematic, dignified way. It was the ugly, silent, can't-breathe kind of crying, the kind that happens when a reality you've been dreading finally collides with you head-on. My father had just died. The doctor's words were still echoing in the hollow space he'd left behind, a sterile, clinical pronouncement of an ending. I had been his primary caregiver for the better part of a year, a role I had accepted with a sense of solemn duty, and now, that duty was over. The purpose that had structured my every waking moment was gone, and in its place was a profound, terrifying emptiness. I had managed to hold it together through the handshakes of condolence, the signing of forms, the surreal logistics of death. I'd walked out of the hospital like a functioning human being, but the short journey to my car had stripped away the last of my composure. The simple act of putting the key in the ignition felt like an insurmountable task, a step into a future I didn't recognize and certainly didn't want. So I had simply stopped. I slid down the side of my car, and let the desolation take me. That's when I heard the footsteps, firm and quick, followed by the electronic chirp of a car unlocking nearby. I didn't look up. I was a strange, crumpled shape in a poorly lit corner of a parking garage, and the sensible thing for any stranger to do was to get in their car and drive away as quickly as possible. I expected the sound of a car door closing, an engine starting. Instead, the footsteps paused. "Hey, are you okay?" The voice was kind, deeper than I expected, with a slight note of hesitation, of caution. I still didn't look up. I shook my head, a small, jerky movement. The silence stretched, and I was sure he would leave now. He'd done his due diligence as a decent human being. But he didn't. I heard a soft rustling sound, and then a plastic water bottle was being held out in my peripheral vision. "Here," he said. "You look like you could use this." Slowly, I lifted my head. He was tall, with broad shoulders that seemed to fill the space even in the cavernous garage. He was wearing a ridiculously well-fitted suit, the kind that spoke of boardrooms and important meetings, but it was slightly rumpled, his tie loosened at the collar. His dark hair was a bit of a mess, as if he'd been running his hands through it. But it was his eyes that caught me. They were a warm, clear brown, and they were looking at me not with pity, but with a genuine, uncomplicated concern that cut right through the fog of my grief. He wasn't looking at me like I was a problem to be solved or an inconvenience to be navigated. He was looking at me like I was a person. I took the water bottle. My hand was shaking so badly that the water sloshed against the sides. "Thank you." I managed to choke out, the words feeling foreign in my throat. He gave a small, almost shy smile. "Don't mention it." He gestured vaguely with his thumb over his shoulder. "My mom's on the 5th floor. Chemo. Mondays are always a lot." He didn't need to say more. In that one short sentence, he had built a bridge across the chasm of our anonymity. He understood the unique exhaustion of hospitals, the weight of watching someone you love suffer. He wasn't just a stranger in a suit. He was someone who knew this landscape. He crouched down, balancing on the balls of his feet, so he was closer to my level, a gesture of such disarming empathy that it almost made me start crying again. "I'm Julian, by the way, Leo," I said. He just nodded, as if my name was something he planned to remember. He didn't press for details. He didn't ask why I was crying on the floor of a parking garage. He just sat there with me, in silence, leaning against the fender of his own much nicer, much cleaner car. We stayed like that for what might have been 5 minutes or 15. He drank from his own water bottle, and I drank from mine. We watched a car drive past, its headlights sweeping across the concrete pillars. In the shared, unspoken understanding of that miserable place, a strange and fragile connection was forged. He didn't try to fix me. He didn't offer platitudes. He just offered his presence, a quiet anchor in the dizzying storm of my loss. When I finally found the strength to push myself to my feet, my legs unsteady, he stood up with me. "Are you going to be okay to drive?" he asked, his brow furrowed with that same earnest concern. I nodded, though I wasn't sure I believed it myself. "I think so. Thank you, Julian." For this, I gestured vaguely at the space around us, at the water bottle in my hand, at the time he had given me. He waved it off. "Anytime." Seriously, he hesitated for a second, then pulled a business card from his wallet. "Look, this is probably weird, but if you need anything, a ride, someone to grab a coffee with who gets it, whatever, just call." He handed me the card. "Julian Hayes, Senior Consultant." A phone number. An email address. It felt like a lifeline. I tucked it into my pocket, the sharp corner of the cardstock a tangible proof that this encounter had been real. I never expected to use it. But a week later, drowning in the silence of my father's empty house, surrounded by a lifetime of possessions that I had no idea how to sort through, I found the card in the pocket of the jeans I'd worn that day. On a whim, fueled by loneliness and a desperate need to talk to someone who wasn't offering me a casserole and a pitying look, I sent him a text. "Hey, it's Leo from the parking garage. Is that offer for coffee still open?" He responded in less than a minute. "Absolutely. When and where?" That coffee turned into a 2-hour conversation. He told me about his mom's fight, about the pressures of his job, about his love for old sci-fi movies. I found myself talking about my dad, Not just his illness, but who he was, his terrible jokes, his passion for gardening, the way he used to hum off-key while he made breakfast. I talked about my photography, a passion I'd had to put on hold, and the daunting feeling of trying to pick up the pieces of my own life. Julian listened. He really listened. He asked questions that showed he was paying attention, and he shared parts of himself with an openness that I, a person who had always been emotionally guarded, found both startling and deeply comforting. That coffee became a weekly ritual. Then it became more frequent. We discovered a shared love for a local indie movie theater, for a specific pizzeria that put way too much garlic on its crust, for long, aimless walks through the city's quieter neighborhoods. We became friends. It happened so naturally, so easily, that it felt less like a choice and more like an inevitability, like two streams finding their way to the same river. He was the steady, cheerful current to my quiet, reflective eddy. He pulled me out of the stagnant grief that had threatened to consume me. He'd show up at my door with takeout and a terrible action movie, insisting that what I needed was to watch things explode for 2 hours. He'd drag me on hikes, pushing me up hills until my lungs burned, and I had no energy left to do anything but appreciate the view from the top. He had a girlfriend, Sarah. She was nice enough, smart, ambitious, a lawyer who worked long hours. I met her a few times. They were the kind of couple that made sense on paper. They looked good together. But even from my peripheral vantage point, I could see the hairline fractures, the way their schedules rarely aligned, the way their conversations sometimes felt like negotiations. Julian never complained about her, not really, but I could read the exhaustion in the lines around his eyes after a weekend that was supposed to be relaxing but was instead filled with obligatory social events he clearly hadn't wanted to attend. He was the sun, bright and warm and seemingly inexhaustible, but I was a photographer. I was trained to notice the shadows, the nuances of light. I could see the parts of him that were dimming. It was probably about a year into our friendship that I had to admit a difficult truth to myself. I was in love with him. It wasn't a sudden lightning strike. It was a slow dawn. It was in the way my stomach would do a little flip when his name lit up my phone screen. It was in the way I found myself cataloging the details of his face, the small scar above his left eyebrow, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he laughed, a genuine, unforced laugh that he seemed to reserve for our time together. It was in the profound, bone-deep comfort I felt just by being in the same room with him. I was a quiet person by nature, someone who often felt like an observer in my own life, and my photography was an extension of that. I watched the world from behind a lens, framing it, trying to find the story in a single, frozen moment. And the story I kept finding, the subject my focus invariably returned to, was Julian. I buried the feeling. I buried it deep. He was my friend, my best friend. He had saved me, in his own unassuming way, from the worst period of my life. He was straight. He had a girlfriend. My feelings for him were a complication I could not afford, a risk I was unwilling to take. To voice them would be to shatter the beautiful, simple thing we had built. It would be an act of profound selfishness. So I packed the feeling away in a box, sealed it shut, and shoved it into the most remote corner of my heart. I built walls around it, soundproofed and reinforced. I became an architect of my own internal prison, and I learned to live with the quiet ache of it. I told myself that his friendship was more than enough, and for a long time, it was. I was happy to be the quiet observer, the keeper of his casual confessions, the safe harbor where he could dock when the seas of his own life got choppy. I was his friend. That was my role, and I was determined to play it perfectly. The shift began on a Tuesday in October. The air had that crisp, melancholic edge that signals the true arrival of autumn, and the leaves were in their final, fiery rebellion before the fall. Julian called me around 9 at night. His voice was flat, hollowed out. "Hey, are you busy?" "Never for you," I said, my standard reply. I was in my darkroom, the faint, acidic smell of fixer clinging to the air. I was trying to coax an image of a rain-slicked street into existence, but I switched on the safe light and abandoned it without a second thought. "What's up?" "You sound weird." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, filled with the faint sound of traffic. Sarah and I broke up, he said, and the words landed without any dramatic fanfare. They were just a statement of fact, delivered in that same toneless voice. My heart did a complicated, treacherous thing. It leaped with a hope so sharp and sudden it felt like a betrayal, and then immediately sank with guilt and concern for him. Oh man, Julian, I'm so sorry. What happened? It was mutual, he said, but the words sounded flimsy, inadequate. We've been heading this way for a while, you know? It was just time. We finally just said it out loud. He sighed, a heavy, weary sound. Her name is still on the lease. She's staying with her sister for a bit while we figure it all out. The apartment just feels ridiculously empty, an empty space. A void. I knew that feeling all too well. Do you want to come over? I asked, the offer leaving my lips before I'd even fully formed the thought. I've got that terrible kung fu movie you wanted to see and a pint of mint chocolate chip with your name on it. I heard the ghost of a smile in his voice. Yeah, he said softly. Yeah, that sounds really good, actually. I'll be there in 20-inch when he arrived. He looked like a ship that had been tossed by a storm, sails torn, compass spinning. He had his gym bag slung over his shoulder, a habit from when he'd sometimes come straight from a workout, but it seemed more like a security blanket tonight. He dropped it by the door and sank onto my couch, running both hands through his hair. He didn't want to talk about the breakup, and I didn't push him. Instead, we watched the movie. I made tea. He ate the entire pint of ice cream straight from the carton. He fell asleep on the couch before the final, ridiculous fight scene, his head lolling to the side, his face slack with exhaustion. I watched him for a long time, the flickering light from the television screen dancing across his features. The architect in me, the one who had so carefully constructed the walls around my heart, was screaming warnings. This was dangerous territory. He was vulnerable. He was lonely. I was the safe option. But the photographer in me, the observer, just saw the profound exhaustion in the slump of his shoulders, the deep ache he was trying so hard not to show. I gently took the empty ice cream carton from his lap, turned off the TV, and draped a thick wool blanket over him. I retreated to my bedroom, leaving the door slightly ajar, a habit I had from when my father was sick, just in case he needed me. I lay awake for hours, listening to the sound of his breathing from the other room, a steady, rhythmic presence that was both a profound comfort and a source of quiet torment. That night set the precedent. It became the first brick in the foundation of a new, unspoken ritual. He started staying over more and more. It was never planned. It would be a late night of work for him, and a text would come through. Just leaving the office. Completely fried. Mind if I just crash on your couch? The thought of going back to the empty apartment is a lot, or we'd be hanging out, watching a game, or just talking, and the hour would grow late, and he'd just stay. The couch became his unofficial second bed. He kept a toothbrush in my bathroom and a change of clothes in the gym bag he now left permanently by my front door. It was a comfortable arrangement, one that existed in a carefully maintained state of platonic ambiguity. He needed a friend. He needed a place that didn't feel haunted by the ghost of his past relationship. I was providing that. It was simple. At least, that's what I told myself. But my internal world was anything but simple. Every night he was there, my apartment transformed. The air grew thicker, charged with his presence. I became hyper-aware of everything. The sound of him shifting on the couch. The soft sigh he'd let out as he drifted off to sleep. The scent of his shampoo that lingered in the hallway in the morning. I was living in a state of constant, low-grade tension, a quiet hum of yearning that vibrated just beneath the surface of our easy friendship. I was an artist living with his muse, pretending not to notice the beauty that was sleeping in the next room. Then, the ritual escalated. It was a few weeks into this new arrangement. He had come over after a particularly brutal day of meetings, a deep weariness etched into his face. I made dinner. We ate in comfortable silence, and by 10 o'clock, he was sprawled on the couch, already half asleep. I did my usual routine, covered him with the blanket, turned down the lights. But as I was heading to my room, he stirred. "Leo," he mumbled, his voice thick with sleep. I paused in the hallway. "Yeah. My back is killing me," he groaned, shifting uncomfortably. Your couch was designed by a sadist. I heard him sit up, the leather sighing under his weight. Hey, would it be, would it be weird if I just crashed on the floor in your room? It's quieter in there. And the floor has to be better than this thing. The air in the hallway seemed to crackle. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was a new door, a new threshold. The architect was sounding alarms, claxons blaring about compromised structures and imminent collapse. He was asking to cross a boundary, to enter my most private space. But the excuse was so plausible. Comfort, quiet, a bad back. It was all perfectly reasonable. To say no would be to make it weird. To say no would be to admit that his presence in my room, even on the floor, was more than just a matter of logistics. It would be an admission of my own carefully guarded feelings. So I did the only thing I could do. I played my part. No, of course not. I said, my voice impressively steady. Don't be an idiot. Don't sleep on the floor. The bed's big enough. I don't kick, I promise. The words felt reckless, dangerous, but they were wrapped in the guise of casual generosity. He was quiet for a moment. You sure? Positive, I said, turning and walking into my room before I could second-guess myself. It's fine, Julian. Get in here, he followed a moment later, looking hesitant, almost apologetic. He had his pillow from the couch clutched in his hand. Thanks, man, he said quietly. I just nodded, turning away to busy myself with pulling back the covers on the side of the bed he would take, the side farthest from the door. The whole thing felt surreal, a scene from a movie about someone else's life. He changed in the bathroom and came back wearing a t-shirt and sweats. I was already in bed, lying stiffly on my side, facing away from the center, trying to make myself take up as little space as possible. He slid under the covers, and the mattress dipped with his weight. The bed, which had always felt more than big enough for one person, suddenly felt impossibly small. He lay on his back, staring up at the ceiling, a careful foot of space between us. But it wasn't enough. I could feel the heat radiating from his body, a warmth that seemed to travel across the sheets and sink into my skin. I could hear his breathing, clearer now, closer. It was a slow, steady rhythm that my own frantic pulse tried and failed to match. This is way better, he murmured into the darkness. Thanks again, no problem, I whispered back, my voice tight. Sleep, for me, was a long time coming that night. I was acutely aware of every tiny movement, every shift of weight. My body was a live wire. I was terrified of rolling over, of accidentally touching him, of doing anything that would betray the storm of emotion raging inside me. This was a new level of torment, a new kind of intimacy that was both exquisite and agonizing. I was sharing a bed with the man I loved, and I had to pretend it meant nothing more than convenience. This, too, became the new ritual. The couch was officially retired. Now, when he stayed over, it was just an unspoken assumption that he would end up in my bed. We developed a silent choreography. He'd take the left side, I'd take the right. We'd murmur good night and turn away from each other. At first, there was always that careful, deliberate space between us, a buffer zone of propriety. But as the nights turned into weeks, the space began to shrink. Sleep is a great dismantler of boundaries. In the unconscious hours, we would drift. I'd wake up in the middle of the night to find his arm thrown across my waist or his leg tangled with mine. Sometimes I'd wake up to find myself curled towards him, my face buried in the warm space between his shoulder blades, breathing in the simple, clean scent of him. Each time, my heart would seize in a panic. I would carefully, painstakingly detangle myself, moving with the slow, deliberate precision of a bomb disposal expert, and retreat to my designated side of the bed. My mind would race, replaying the contact, analyzing it. Was he awake? Did he notice? Was this just the unconscious sprawl of a deep sleeper, or was it something more? It was a form of self-torture. I was a cartographer mapping a treacherous landscape, trying to find meaning in every contour, every accidental point of contact. The days were easy, our friendship as solid and comfortable as ever. We'd make coffee in the morning, complaining about work, planning our weekend. It was all so normal. But the nights were a secret territory, a space of profound and aching ambiguity. He was the unknowing initiator. Or so I told myself. He was the one who, in his search for comfort and escape, was slowly breaking down the walls I had so carefully built. He was the one who had asked to sleep on my floor, who had accepted the offer of my bed, who now drifted across the mattress in his sleep as if drawn by some unconscious gravity. I was the quiet observer, a passive participant in this slow-motion collision. I was just letting it happen, telling myself I had no other choice, that to protest would be to reveal everything. My role was to absorb, to analyze, to endure the sweet agony of it all in silence. I was developing a new kind of art form, the art of pretending. I became a master of feigned nonchalance, of casual acceptance. But inside, I was a tightly coiled spring of hope and fear, and I knew, with a dreadful certainty, that eventually something had to give. The tension was becoming unsustainable. The silence was getting louder. The breaking point arrived on a rainy Thursday night in late November. The weather was miserable, a cold, persistent drizzle that made the whole city feel gray and weary. Julian had been quiet all evening. He'd had a major project implode at work, a months-long effort that had been scrapped at the last minute by a client. He wasn't angry, just deflated. All the usual light seemed to have gone out of him. We ate dinner mostly in silence, and afterward, we didn't even bother with a movie. He just wanted to take a shower while I cleaned up the kitchen. When he came into the bedroom, I was already under the covers, reading a book, or pretending to. The words were just black marks on a page. My entire consciousness was focused on the sound of the bathroom door opening. He was wearing his usual sleep clothes, his hair damp and curling at the edges. He looked tired down to his bones. He slid into his side of the bed without a word, the mattress dipping, the familiar shift of weight that I had come to both dread and crave. But tonight, instead of turning away from me, he lay on his back, his hands laced behind his head, and stared at the ceiling. I put my book down on the nightstand. The only light in the room was my small reading lamp, which cast a soft, warm glow over the bed, creating an island of intimacy in the darkness. The sound of the rain against the window pane was a gentle, rhythmic drumming. "Tough day," I said quietly. It wasn't a question. He let out a long, slow breath. "You have no idea." He was quiet for a long time after that. I thought he might have fallen asleep. But then he turned his head on the pillow and looked at me. His gaze was direct, unwavering, and held a depth of emotion I had never seen there before. It was a look that bypassed all our carefully constructed pretenses. It felt like he was seeing me, really seeing me, for the first time. The air thickened, growing heavy with all the things we had never said. My heart started its frantic, familiar rhythm, a wild drum against my ribs. This was the moment. I knew it. The culmination of all those nights, all those accidental touches, all that shared, silent space. This was the precipice. He whispered my name. "Leo." The sound was different this time. It wasn't mumbled or sleepy. It was clear, deliberate, and achingly vulnerable. It held the weight of a confession. I turned my head fully to face him, my own breath catching in my throat. We were inches apart, close enough that I could see the faint flecks of gold in his brown eyes, close enough that I could feel the warmth of his breath on my cheek. The world seemed to shrink down to this single space, this small island of light in the rainy dark. And then he asked the question that would change everything, the key that would unlock the door I had been standing beside for so long. "Would it be okay?" he started, his voice a low, rough thing, frayed with nerves and something that sounded impossibly like hope. He swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing in the soft light. "Would it be okay if I kissed you?" Time stopped. The rain, the city, my own frantic heartbeat, it all faded into a distant hum. There was only his face, his eyes searching mine, his question hanging in the air between us like a fragile, luminous thing. It was a question that offered me a choice. He wasn't assuming. He wasn't taking. He was asking. He was making himself vulnerable, placing the next move, the future of everything we were, entirely in my hands. All the years of silent yearning, of careful friendship, of buried feelings, it all led to this. I could have said no. I could have laughed it off, made a joke, pretended he was just tired and confused. I could have retreated to the safety of our established dynamic, bolted the door, and spent the rest of my life wondering. But looking at him, at the raw honesty in his eyes, at the man who had found me broken in a parking garage and had patiently, kindly, helped me piece myself back together, I knew I couldn't. I had been an observer for too long. It was time to step into the frame. I didn't trust my voice, so I just nodded. A small, single movement. But it was enough. A universe of relief seemed to wash over his face. He moved slowly, tentatively, as if he was afraid I might still bolt. He raised a hand, his fingers gently brushing against my jaw, his thumb stroking my cheek. The touch was electric, a jolt of pure sensation that shot through my entire body. It wasn't an accidental touch in the dark. It was intentional. It was a question and a promise. He leaned in, and I met him halfway, closing the final, impossible distance between us. His lips were soft, hesitant at first. It wasn't a kiss of passion or demand. It was a kiss of discovery. It was a question being answered, a story being told without words. It was quiet and careful, and it held all the tenderness and confusion and unspoken affection of the past 3 years. It tasted of mint from his toothpaste and the faint, familiar scent of him that I had come to associate with safety. In that one, gentle press of his lips against mine, the carefully constructed architecture of my life didn't just tremble, it dissolved. The walls I had built around my heart crumbled to dust. And I wasn't scared. For the first time, I felt utterly, terrifyingly, and beautifully free. I kissed him back, a silent affirmation, a release of a breath I felt like I'd been holding for years. It was happening. It was real. The morning after was a study in silence and absence. I woke slowly, drifting up from the deepest, most peaceful sleep I'd had in years. For a moment, I was just basking in the warmth, in the residual glow of the night before. I felt a smile on my face before I was even fully conscious. I reached out, my hand moving through the empty space beside me. My eyes snapped open. The sheets on his side of the bed were cold. He was gone. I sat up, my heart sinking with a sudden, sickening lurch. The room was bright with the flat, gray light of a post-rain morning. His pillow was still there, indented with the shape of his head. But there was no note. His gym bag was gone from its usual spot by the door. His toothbrush was missing from the bathroom. It was as if he had been erased, leaving behind only the ghost of his presence and the vivid, searing memory of a kiss. I tried to rationalize it. He had to get to work early. He didn't want to wake me. It was a perfectly logical explanation. But a cold knot of dread was tightening in my stomach. The silence from my phone was deafening. Usually, there would have been a text by now. Morning. Left you some coffee, or thanks for last night. See you later, but there was nothing. Just silence. The silence stretched throughout the day. I sent a tentative text around noon. Hey, hope you have a good day. It was casual, non-committal. I didn't mention the kiss. I didn't want to scare him. I just wanted a sign that he was still there, that we were still us. The little delivered receipt under my message felt like a mockery. Hours passed. No reply. I tried to work, to lose myself in the familiar alchemy of the darkroom, but my hands shook. The images I developed were blurry, unfocused, mirroring the chaos in my own head. Every possibility was a torment. Had I imagined the whole thing? The tenderness, the vulnerability in his eyes? Had it just been a moment of post-breakup confusion for him, a misguided search for comfort that he now deeply regretted? Had I been nothing more than a convenient, warm body? The thought was a physical pain, a sharp, twisting thing in my gut. The hope that had bloomed so brightly the night before was wilting, turning gray and brittle. By evening, the dread had curdled into a miserable mix of hurt and anxiety. I called him. It rang once, twice, 3 times, and then went to voicemail. Julian never let his phone go to voicemail. He was surgically attached to the thing. He had either rejected the call or turned his phone off entirely. Both possibilities were devastating. He was avoiding me. He had crossed a line and, in the stark light of day, had sprinted back in the other direction, leaving me standing alone on the other side. The next 2 days were a special kind of hell. It was the ambiguity all over again, but this time it was laced with the poison of regret and rejection. The silence from him was a tangible thing, a heavy blanket that smothered all the air in my apartment. The space that had felt like a sanctuary when he was in it now felt like a tomb. Every corner held a memory of him. The couch where he used to sleep, the spot on the floor where he'd left his bag, the bed that now felt cavernously, achingly empty. I was furious with him. I was heartbroken. And more than anything, I was terrified that I had not only lost the future I had dared to imagine for a few short hours, but that I had also completely destroyed the friendship that had been my anchor for 3 years. On the third day, I couldn't take it anymore. The not knowing was eating me alive. I had to have an answer, even if it was the one I was dreading. I had to look him in the eye. I had to hear it from him. The quiet observer had to become the actor. Summoning a reserve of courage I didn't know I possessed, I put on my coat, walked out of my apartment, and drove to his. His apartment building was one of those new, sterile places with glass balconies and an impersonal lobby. It felt like him, or at least, the version of him he presented to the world, sleek, successful, put together. As I stood in front of his door, number 704, my heart was a trapped bird beating against my ribs. My hand hovered over the door, shaking. What was I even going to say? Why did you kiss me and run? Was any of it real? It all sounded accusatory, desperate. I took a deep breath, the way he'd taught me to do on those hikes, a slow inhale to steady the nerves. Then I knocked. 3 firm, deliberate raps. I heard movement inside, a shuffling sound. A long pause. For a second, I thought he wasn't going to answer. Then, the lock clicked, and the door opened a few inches. Julian stood there, still in his work clothes from the day before, his shirt wrinkled, his hair a mess. He looked exhausted, haunted. He didn't look at me. His gaze was fixed on a spot on the floor somewhere to my left. "Leo," he said, his voice flat. "Can I come in?" I asked, my own voice surprisingly calm. He hesitated for a fraction of a second too long before stepping back, opening the door wider. I walked into the apartment I had only been in a handful of times before. It was just as he'd described it, impersonal and empty. Boxes were stacked in one corner, presumably Sarah's. The space felt transitional, unlived in. It was a stark contrast to the lived-in comfort of my own place. He closed the door behind me, but didn't turn around. He just stood there with his back to me, one hand resting on the doorknob. The silence was thick with tension, a palpable force in the room. "Julian," I said, and my voice cracked on his name. I cleared my throat. "Talk to me." He finally turned, but he still wouldn't meet my eyes. He looked trapped. "There's nothing to talk about," he mumbled. "It was a mistake. I was tired and confused. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have. It was a mistake." Each word was a hammer blow. A mistake. That's all it was. A moment of weakness. And I had been the collateral damage. The hurt was so sharp, so intense, it almost buckled my knees. But then, a wave of anger followed, hot and clarifying. Anger at him for his cowardice, and anger at myself for letting him reduce what had felt so real to a simple mistake. "No," I said, and my voice was stronger now, fueled by the fire of my own pain. "You don't get to do that. You don't get to kiss me like that, after all this time, after all these nights, and then disappear and call it a mistake from a safe distance. Look at me. Damn it." He flinched, but he finally, slowly, lifted his head. His eyes were shot with red, and the conflict I had seen in them the other night was back, but magnified, a raging storm. He looked miserable. He looked terrified. "You can't just show up in my life when I'm at my lowest point," I continued, the words tumbling out now. All the things I'd been holding back. "You can't become my best friend. You can't sleep in my bed for months and then kiss me with a tenderness that could break a person's heart, and then tell me it was a mistake. It wasn't a mistake for me, Julian. For me, it was everything." A tear escaped his eye and tracked a path down his unshaven cheek. He looked away again, his jaw tight. "You don't understand," he whispered. "Then make me understand." I took a step closer, my voice rising. "Because right now, all I understand is that you used me, that I was just a convenient comfort while you figured your own life out. And if that's true, you just need to say it. I can take it. But what I can't take is this silence. This cowardice. I deserve more than that from you, he finally broke. A ragged sob escaped him, and he sank down, sliding his back against the door until he was sitting on the floor, his head in his hands. I'm not a coward, he choked out, his voice muffled. I'm so scared. My anger evaporated, replaced by a wave of aching empathy. I crouched down in front of him, the same way he had crouched in front of me in that parking garage all those years ago. Scared of what? I asked gently. He looked up at me, his face a mess of confusion and despair. Of this, he whispered, gesturing between the two of us. Of what it means. I've spent my whole life on a specific track, Leo. A plan. The job, the girlfriend, the future. It was all laid out. I knew who I was. And then you. Our friendship, it became the only real thing in my life. The only place I could breathe. And I didn't want to look at why. I didn't want to understand it. He took a shuddering breath. That night, kissing you, it wasn't a mistake. It was the most honest thing I've done in years. And that's what terrifies me. Because it felt right. It felt like coming home. And I have no idea who I am if that's true. I have no map for this. I just panicked. I saw this whole life I'd built for myself crumbling. And I ran. He looked at me, his eyes pleading. I'm so sorry, Leo. I'm so sorry I hurt you. I'm just lost, and there it was. The truth. Not a rejection, but a confession of fear. He wasn't running from me. He was running from himself. All the tension in my body seemed to release at once. I reached out and put my hand on his knee. Hey, I said softly. Look at me, he did. You think I have a map for this? I've been in love with you for years, Julian. I've been living in this uncharted territory alone. The only difference is, now, maybe we can be lost together. A ghost of a smile, wet with tears, touched his lips. Yeah, he whispered. Yeah, I said, my own smile finally returning. But no more running. Okay, we talk. We figure it out. Slowly, he nodded, a wave of relief so profound it was almost visible washing over him. He reached out and wrapped his arms around me, pulling me into a hug that was clumsy and desperate and utterly real. He buried his face in my shoulder, and I held him, right there on the floor of his empty apartment. We weren't on any kind of solid ground yet. We were still adrift. But for the first time, we were holding on to each other. And it felt like a start. It felt like hope. The conversation that followed was long and halting, full of pauses and difficult admissions. We moved from the floor to the impersonal sofa, a bottle of water shared between us, a faint echo of our very first meeting. He talked about the pressure he'd always felt to follow a certain path, a script written for him by his family, by society, by his own expectations. He talked about how his relationship with Sarah had felt more like a partnership in a business venture than a romance, a ticking of boxes. He admitted that the nights at my apartment had become the focal point of his life, the only time he felt he could truly let his guard down and just be. He confessed that the growing physical proximity between us in bed had been both terrifying and something he had started to crave, that he would lie awake, just as I had, hyper-aware of me, wanting to close the distance, but having no framework to understand that desire. I, in turn, told him everything. I told him about the slow dawn of my feelings for him, about the deliberate, painful process of trying to suppress them. I told him about the sweet agony of those nights, of waking up with him next to me and having to pretend it meant nothing. I confessed my own fear, the terror of losing his friendship, which had been the most important thing in my life. As we talked, the layers of misunderstanding and pretense peeled away, leaving behind a raw and fragile honesty. We were two people who had been navigating the same emotional labyrinth from different starting points, finally meeting in the middle. There were no grand declarations of love, no sweeping romantic promises. It was quieter than that, more profound. It was the simple, shaky agreement to face the unknown together. When the sky outside began to darken, a sense of calm had settled over us. The storm had passed, leaving a quiet, clean air in its wake. I don't want to stay here tonight, he said quietly, looking around the sterile apartment as if seeing it clearly for the first time. Can I come home with you? Home. He had called my apartment home. My heart swelled. Yeah, I said, my voice thick with emotion. Let's go home. That night, for the first time, everything was different. When we got back to my apartment, the space felt welcoming again, cleansed of the anxious energy that had filled it. When we got into bed, there was no hesitation, no careful placement of bodies on opposite sides of the mattress. He turned to me immediately, and I turned to him. He wrapped an arm around my waist and pulled me close, burying his face in my neck, and I wrapped my own arms around him, holding him tightly. There was no space between us. There was no ambiguity. It wasn't about convenience or plausible deniability anymore. It was about choice. It was about a deliberate, intentional closeness. "Is this okay?" he murmured against my skin, his voice still holding a trace of the day's fragility. "It's more than okay," I whispered back, pressing a kiss into his hair. "It's perfect." We didn't talk much more. We didn't need to. We just held each other, our breathing slowly syncing up, our heartbeats finding a shared rhythm. For the first time, the silence between us wasn't filled with tension or unspoken questions. It was filled with peace. It was the quiet of a harbor after a long and dangerous voyage. I fell asleep in his arms, feeling safer and more whole than I had ever felt in my entire life. In the weeks and months that followed, we began to build our new normal. It was a slow and gentle process, like tending to a delicate, new-grown plant. We were learning a new language together, a language of quiet affection and open communication. The grand gestures of romance you see in movies were absent. Our love story was written in smaller, more intimate moments. It was in the way he would now reach for my hand instinctively when we walked down the street. It was in the way I would come out of my darkroom to find he had made me a cup of tea, just the way I liked it. It was in the mornings, waking up tangled together, his sleepy smile the first thing I saw. He eventually moved out of his apartment, a symbolic and practical severing of his ties to his old life. Some of his things migrated to my place: his favorite coffee mug, a stack of his books, his ridiculously complicated gaming console. My apartment, which had once been solely my sanctuary, slowly, naturally, became our sanctuary. The door to my bedroom was now closed at night, not to shut anything out, but to keep our world in. The space that had once been a landscape of longing and uncertainty was now simply home. My photography changed, too. I had always been an observer of landscapes, of quiet, empty streets, of moments devoid of people. But now, my lens kept finding him. Julian reading on the couch, the afternoon light catching the dust motes dancing around him. Julian laughing in the kitchen, his head thrown back. Julian asleep, his face peaceful and unguarded. I was no longer just an observer of his life. I was a part of it, and my art began to reflect that intimacy, that joy. I was capturing the story of us. There were still moments of fear, of course, moments of navigating this new identity for him, of introducing our new reality to the world outside our bubble. But we faced them together. The foundation of our friendship, that deep well of trust and understanding we had built over 3 years, proved to be the strongest possible base for our relationship. We already knew how to talk to each other, how to listen, how to be each other's safe harbor. We were just learning how to do it while holding hands. One Saturday morning, months later, I woke up to the smell of coffee. I found Julian in the kitchen, standing by the window, watching the morning light spill over the city. He was wearing my favorite old sweatshirt, the one with the paint stains on the sleeve. He turned as I came in and gave me that slow, easy smile that was now just for me. He handed me a mug. Our fingers brushed. It was a simple, domestic moment, the kind of ordinary that I once would have only dreamed of. He looked at me, his eyes full of a quiet, steady love. "You know," he said softly, "that day in the parking garage, I almost just got in my car and drove away. Why didn't you?" I asked, my heart full. He shrugged, a small smile playing on his lips. "I don't know. Something just told me not to. It felt like I was supposed to stop. It felt like I had found something I didn't even know I was looking for. And I suppose, in the end, that is the most beautiful truth of it all. Some moments in your life are not just doors to new rooms, but portals to whole new landscapes. They are the quiet, unexpected intersections where one person's journey of healing meets another's journey of self-discovery. He found me when I was broken, when I had forgotten how to breathe, and in the slow, patient process of our friendship, he gave me back my breath. And I, in my quiet observation, simply created a space safe enough for him to finally hear the truth of his own heart. We didn't fix each other. We just came alongside each other, and in the beautiful, honest silence we had learned to create together, we finally began to heal. We found a place to land, and we called it home.